Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. Today we'll be talking about lesson 16 of our study, which covers the Gospel according to John, chapter 13, verses 1 through 38. As we left off, Jesus has come into town in preparation for the feast of the Passover. We're going to be looking here a little bit, and from now and through all of the events of the Passion, at some of the timing around here. We talked about it with lesson 15 and chapter 12 in some more detail. And you can reference the book or the video for those for a more detailed overview of the timing of Holy Week here. We won't go through all of it again, but we will, as events happen, make sure that we orient them at the appropriate point in time. The reason for that will come to full fruition as we talk about the crucifixion and related events, and we'll see what John's doing, and it will be extremely important for understanding what's going on and how, that we have these things correctly oriented in time. It's also going to be important to do that because the timing in the Gospel according to John, as we've discussed, is not maybe what you're used to from our liturgy. So I challenge everyone, have an open mind, be willing to look at these things as maybe not happening when you think they are. This is the first huge example of that. There is a dinner that we are going to talk about that happens before the Passover that is with Jesus and his disciples. What it is a dinner. What it is not is a Passover meal. It's not the Passover Seder meal. It is, as we see at the beginning of this chapter, right here in this first verse, before the feast of the Passover. This is happening, we don't know what day in this intervening period of time after Jesus has come into town before we get to the feast of the Passover, but we know it's before. It's also significant, I think, that we don't even know what day, right? John is not trying to orient this, anchor this as directly related to the Passover. It's leading up to, but it is not. It's just having dinner with some friends while you're in town getting ready for the Passover. It is not a Passover-related liturgical event for the Jews. So, what is it then? We also see John's setup of the significance of it in this event. This is Jesus preparing for the Passover, his passion, death, and resurrection. How is he getting ready for doing that? This is how he's getting ready for doing that. Not just getting himself ready for that, but getting all of his disciples ready for that as well. This is, as you can imagine, an event that's about to be a tremendous shock for Jesus' disciples. We're going to spend several lessons and several chapters here in the Gospel of Jesus trying to prepare his followers for what it is that's about to happen, and then for what comes after that. So there's going to be a great deal of dialogue and discourse between Jesus and his followers. Mostly monologue, but there will be some dialogue as well. It's a lot of talking. We've looked at, in John's Gospel, so much action happens through dialogue. And that's going to continue here for quite a while. There will be less in the way of action and more in the way of talking. So we can all brace ourselves for that, but it'll be very important talking. The other significant point to make as we're setting all of this up that John makes here, Jesus knows what's coming. Jesus is in no way, shape, or form surprised by any of what happens. All of these things he's doing, in terms of what he's saying to his followers, he's saying because of what's about to happen. He knows. And the things that he's doing here also, he's doing in anticipation of what's about to happen. So that's our setup. We're going to have a very much non-Passover supper. Time for supper. Again, in terms of orienting what's happening at this supper, an interesting point to make is, what do they eat? We don't know. John doesn't care about the meal part of this supper. Remember that in the Synoptic Gospels, so much of the Last Supper is about what's eaten and what Jesus does to it. This is not that. We don't, in fact, even care what they're eating. We don't get a description of the menu or Jesus rating between 1 to 5 stars of how the food was, or a commentary on whether the wine went with the lamb, or any of those sorts of things, because it's not relevant to what we're talking about. What is relevant is this scene here, and what Jesus does, and how a few people are responding to it. What does happen? Jesus, and John tells us emphatically, remember, this guy is God. And he's come uniquely down from heaven, and he's going uniquely back up to heaven. And he knows all of these things, and that he's God is deciding to do these things that are about to happen. So there's Jesus responding and inviting people in a certain way that we'll dig into a little bit more in a moment. And then the rest of this chapter, we're also looking at how 3 key people respond to who Jesus is and what he's doing. And those responses are colored by their expectations of who Jesus is. The chapter sets us up with Judas. In case we've forgotten, that traitor is a dirty traitor, and he's going to betray because he's a traitor, and other things as well. Remember, John definitely doesn't care for Judas, but within that context, think about, why has Judas been following Jesus? Because he clearly is not bought into the core mission of who Jesus is and what he's doing, or he wouldn't be able now to come to this point where he's going to go against it. So one of the responses to Jesus we want to think about is that of Judas. He is rejecting or not continuing to follow along with Jesus here at the end of Jesus' mission. I think that's very much indicative of somebody jumping ship. Right? He's seeing a change in fortunes, and he's following Jesus for the personal opportunity. And he sees that not being what he wants it to be, and he sees a different opportunity elsewhere, and he decides to avail himself of that. So why did he before follow Jesus? He's seeing before, this guy could be the Messiah, like David was. If he's going to be king, and I was on his team early, then I'm going to get a very nice, cushy job as a high-ranking cabinet post. That is definitely what happened when David came to the kingship, is all the people who were with him early ended up getting really good government jobs, and pretty much lifetime guarantee of keeping those positions. And it worked out very well for them. So Judas seems to have been very much on Team Jesus for what could happen for Judas. And when he catches a whiff of fortunes changing, he's less interested in that, and is willing to, his loyalty and his allegiance shifts, and he's more than happy to betray Jesus. And that's why those followers of Jesus who are more genuine in it have so much obvious distaste for him after the fact, is this guy only was doing this out of self-interest, and that's not what we want. So that's our first setup, and the main focus we'll have on Judas, although we will come back around and dig into it a little bit more. There's a bit of a dramatic end to this supper, not to spoil anything, but we'll get to that. Then we have Peter, and we see here, Peter also has a view of who Jesus is that is not entirely correct, and it informs his response here as well. it's not selfish in the way that Judas's is, but it's still wrong. And it's still probably rooted in this idea of Jesus as a Messiah or as a king. Heaven forbid that my king should serve me, right? That's not how that goes. Jesus, we can't do that this way. That's not who you are. You're not going to wash my feet and serve me. That's not who you are. It's not who I see you as. And I think beyond that, that is indicative of an attitude we can still take today as well. Jesus, you can't possibly mean to come down to my level and to serve and minister to me. You are Jesus, your God. You're up here, and that's where you are, and I'm down here. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of everything about Jesus' ministry was not about coming and saying, hey everybody, look at how much better I, your God, am than you are. He could have done that without becoming human. The incarnation is very much more about, actually, I'm going to lower myself to become one of you, to bridge the gap between God and humanity, between heaven and earth. I can't just bring you up, so I'm going to come down and be among and one of you, and even be a servant to you. And in that there's an important, and this is a concept we'll dig into also more in this lesson, this is how Jesus is showing us what love looks like. This love, agape love, that Jesus is demonstrating has been, I think, best defined as putting yourself in the shoes of, in the place of another person. Jesus' love for humanity here, what Jesus is doing is showing he's putting himself in the position of his disciples, his followers, to wash their feet, to serve them. He, as God, is putting himself in the place of humanity. As a practical reflection, because we're going to be called to do likewise, one of the things that is essential to be able to do that is we have to set aside or disregard status. We as human beings are social creatures, and it's built into how we relate to people. When we meet a new person, one of the first subconscious things that happens in the back of our minds is a comparison or a ranking of status. Where am I at? Where is this person at? How does that affect how I interact with, treat, react to this person? If Jesus were doing that, then how would this supper go? Not like this. So one of the things that he's modeling for us is that in order to love people, we have to get rid of all of that status nonsense. And that creates artificial barriers between us and people. Whether we think snobbishly that we're kind of above people and we're using them for our own ends like Judas, or we think that they're above us and we create a distance like Peter. Either way, by allowing those views of status to affect how we relate to other people, we create a distance between us and those people, whichever direction it goes. And we can't do what we can't have the relationship, the interactions with people that we're supposed to be having. We're creating a distance and a barrier between that. So what Jesus is modeling here is, I, who have more right than any person you'll ever meet, to put myself above you, am saying that's not how we do this. And am doing, that's not how we do this. The action is very important here, because Jesus is putting his money where his mouth is. He's not just saying, hey guys, you shouldn't do this. He's saying, hey guys, watch. And then he's serving these people. If anything, he's putting himself status-wise below them. He's going to the other extreme to show, if you do anything here, put yourself below others and serve other people. And that's going to be our visual for what love looks like as we go through and continue through this lesson and dig into what is asked of all of us. That is what love looks like. So Peter, in his misunderstanding of who Jesus is again saying, nope, you're not going to serve me because that's not compatible with my view of who you are. And Jesus has said, no, actually, yes, I am. This is important. This has to happen. You can't have a part in me unless I, your God, am serving you and washing you. Again, we've got a metaphor here for the human condition. We are, as humans, in our natural born state, separated from God. We are unclean. And to be joined back to God, we have to be cleaned. And Jesus is the only one who can do that. And he's come down here to serve us and to clean us. But we're not dirty all over. We're not fundamentally bad, right? That's the important part of there is good in humanity that he came to just kind of clean up a little bit, right? There are a few spots here and there where things got dirty. At feet, we've been traveling for a while, and we've been walking through the muck in the process, and our feet have gotten a little dirty from the human journey that we've all been on. And he's come and said, yep, that's been kind of taking a little bit of a toll on you. You've gotten a little bit dirty. Let me clean that up for you. And then you'll be clean and we'll be good to go. You don't need to be fundamentally cleaned all over. There's a great deal of good left in humanity, even at this point. So we're just going to touch you up some, and then you'll be good to go. But you need that, or you have no part in me. So, Peter, talking to you here, let me clean you. It's going to be important. But, speaking of everybody being more or less clean and good and just needing a little touch-up, that might not be true in every case. We've got some people that are fundamentally worse than others, seems to be the suggestion here. Judas and Peter both have a misunderstanding of who Jesus is, and both are relating to him not the way he wants as a result of that. But one of them is more or less good and just needs some help, and the other one is farther from that and is, I'm not going to say he's irredeemable, but in this case, it doesn't end well for him. He betrays God made flesh after being his friend for years. That does not end well. And the gospel does seem to be suggesting not that people are beyond saving, because at any point anyone can have a conversion experience. The saints definitely teach us that. We've seen so many stories of the saints where people have looked totally lost and irredeemable and have come around and have had great conversion experiences. And Jesus wants to save all people, even Judas, even here. But this is a very scripted event from Jesus' point of view now. It's not that he doesn't want to save Jesus, it's that it's that he knows what's going to happen. He's walking through a script and he knows where that is. So yeah, Judas is not going to make it, not because Jesus is not going to try. But within that context, not everyone can be washed by Jesus. In some cases, that scrubbing and that touch-up from Jesus, that'll see it done and you'll be great. And you'll be like Peter, and we'll see how that goes. In some cases, people reject Jesus and what he's trying to do and prefer ultimately to stay dirty. The one other thing worth commenting on here, because again it'll have a lot of bearing later, is it's worth always looking back to Peter's tremendous enthusiasm. Remember that Jesus chooses to build the future of his church on this guy who at this point has been with him 3 years and still has no idea really who he is or what he's trying to do. What is it that Jesus likes so much about him? Peter jumps all in with great enthusiasm to everything he's doing. No, you can't possibly. Oh, you have to? Then totally, even more than you said you were going to. He's wholeheartedly in everything that he does. And Jesus works with that. More than people who might, have it going on a little bit more in the head, might understand Jesus better even. We see the third party here that will come up is right now way closer to understanding who Jesus is and what he's doing. But Peter is the one that ultimately ends up being chosen to lead the church. And this great enthusiasm that he has seems to be the thing that Jesus just loves about him. And that's important because it suggests something about how we should be with Jesus. Right? In the book of Revelation, in the beginning letters to the churches, what is most damnable is being lukewarm. And what is most commendable is maintaining your original fire, zeal, enthusiasm that you had coming into Christianity years later. Do we start to think, oh, this is a long haul, this Christian thing. I'm only 20 or 30 or 40 or 60 years old. I've got a long time left. I can go kind of halfway now, and I can kind of also have the life I want. And I can kind of walk that line, and I like Jesus, and I'll go to Mass, and I'll give money to the church, and I'll be nice to people, and that'll be enough for now. And then, later, when I'm getting older and closer to death, maybe I'll go the rest of the way, and I'll get there. But I'm going to spend a lot of time working kind of for me now for a while, and the future, we'll get there. But we don't need to be crazy about it. We're supposed to have like a life in this world, and no. All in. The call of Christianity isn't part way in. That doesn't do it. The call is all in. Great enthusiasm. You can mess up a lot with Jesus, and he'll love it if you're doing it with great enthusiasm. Way better to overact overeagerly in a desire to serve Jesus than to hold back and say, well, I'm not quite sure about that. Let me think about it for a while, because I don't know. Discernment is hard. I'm not sure the best thing to do with my life, so I'm going to do nothing for a while, or I'm going to do what I would have done anyway, and we'll figure it out later, and then, with a clear sign, then of course I will do what you want, God. All you need to do is, if you want me to marry this person, become a priest, take this job, give this much money to this cause, whatever it is we're discerning. If you want me to do that, just give me a very clear sign, and then I guess I'll do it. Versus, this feels like the thing I should do. I'm just going to start doing it, and then show me if that's not right. Gets you much, much farther in the spiritual life. And I see so many people, myself included, just get paralyzed in progress in the spiritual life because we lack that enthusiasm. And we're kind of reluctantly willing to go along to the extent that we are pushed very clearly by God. This is a journey, the spiritual life. It is a road, and it has an end. Think about it that way. If you're not 100% sure where to go when you're trying to get somewhere, and you decide, I'm just going to park my car here until I figure out what the right route is to get there, and I'll just park here. And then when that somehow becomes clear to me the way to take, then I'll put my car in drive and I'll start going. You're not going to learn anything more than you know right there. You're just going to sit there and park forever. You're never going to get there. Whereas I'll just drive in the direction I think it's in. And, I'll see things along the way, and I'll be getting closer, and I'll be getting more information about where it is I'm actually going, as long as I'm moving in that direction. Peter's that way. He's always moving in the direction. He's sometimes veering wildly off course, and then Jesus comes along like he does here and says, oh, hold up, buddy. Why don't you turn right here and try going that way a little while? And he does, and then he goes a little too far off that way, and Jesus comes back and says, great, now turn left. We need you to go back a little bit this way. And he does. And he keeps going forward with great enthusiasm. And that is one of Peter's greatest traits. And it is what Jesus needs his church to do too. Because we're not always right about everything. I think that's pretty apparent at this point. He needs us also as a church willing to always move forward enthusiastically into service, and he'll come in and help us do the rest. But again, if we get paralyzed by inaction, we're not going to be serving Jesus. We're not going to be making the progress we need to make. So, this is kind of neat, and we're seeing a lot more of Peter's character that we will continue to come back to over and over again through the rest of the gospel. Here we see what was at first only implicit, Jesus is going to make explicit, which will again be a theme through all of this monologue. I'm going to make sure now that you guys aren't confused about anything. What has been kind of very symbolic and metaphorical is now going to be no, this is what's going on. This is how it is. So, you guys, in case you missed that what I was just doing meant that you're supposed to do that too, you're supposed to do that too. I'm God, I'm serving you, you're serving me, you serve others. Easy math. That's what love looks like, and that's what you're supposed to do. So, in case you missed it, you have to do it because I did it. Go forth and do likewise. Here we see, I think, two very significant points that will move forward with us through this series of dialogue. The first one is that Jesus knows what's going to happen before it happens, but now also he's letting in his disciples. He's going to start telling them things before they happen, which means that he hasn't been, even though he knows, and now he's going to. Also indicating that something has clearly changed. What's changed? Hopefully that's a pretty obvious question at this point. It's no secret in John's Gospel that Jesus is about to die. That should not come as a surprise to us. His passion, death, and resurrection are imminent. This is his last time in Jerusalem. All that is about to happen. So everything that Jesus is doing now is a result of the fact that that's coming and that he knows that's coming. It's also worth noting he's fully aware as he's doing this that they're not going to have any clue what he's talking about yet. Which raises the fascinating question of why is he telling them a bunch of stuff that they're not going to understand? And fascinatingly, the answer to that is this isn't for them now. Jesus isn't preparing them actually to deal with his crucifixion and death. What he's doing is preparing them for what comes after that. This whole next section is kind of an instruction book for the early church. He's laying a foundation, a framework through talking for the church. And after that, he's going to lay the follow-up foundation sacramentally for the church as well. But first, we're going to get just the spoken form of who are you and what do I want you to do when I'm gone. So he's teeing all of that up, and that's why he's telling people things before they happen now. Also, it keeps them from having any doubt about Jesus intended everything that happens. Because it would be very easy afterwards to look back in hindsight and say, whoops, I didn't mean for that to happen. Good context. Cat's getting a little ornery here. But this is unlike cats knocking things off of shelves. Nothing that happens with Jesus is a mistake. And everything he's doing is fully intended. So that's the first point. The second point here is he makes it extremely clear that a small subset of people have been chosen. Not everybody. Did Jesus not come to save everyone? He means something different. He has chosen a very small number of people for this specific thing that he is setting up, which is his church. And he's chosen his church as the vehicle, the means by which salvation is offered to everyone. So he's chosen to offer salvation to all of humanity. There's no one that's being excluded from that offer other than those who opt out, like Judas. But there's a very small number of people who have been chosen to make it available. Jesus is not himself making salvation directly available to everyone. He doesn't come down after the ascension, introduce himself, "Hi, I'm Jesus, would you like to be saved?" to every person on earth, which he could have done. He could have done it all at once. He didn't. He left these guys to do that. And all of this next section over several more chapters is going to be him telling them how he intends them to do it. The question of why he intends them to do it is not as clear. We'll definitely think about it a little bit. There's a less clear answer, but I don't want to leave it just with it's a mystery. But it is definitely a thing worth meditating on because, not to spoil anything, what he's telling these guys to do is what we're supposed to do, right? It's not, those 11 guys were supposed to do it, and they didn't manage to convert the whole world, so I guess they failed, but that doesn't have any bearing on me. No, we are all, as members of this church, likewise called to share in its mission and chosen to help expand and extend the mission that was started by these guys. But when in John's Gospel we talk about a small number of people being chosen, what we're talking about is they're chosen to found the church and to spread the gospel, not they're uniquely chosen for salvation. So that'll be the other point that's very much worth making here. In the spirit now of telling people what's going to happen before it happens, Jesus immediately drops a bombshell. One of you guys is going to betray me. And, well, first, before we get into that, Jesus is troubled in spirit by this. It's an important thing to note because I think, personally, at least, I can get into this mindset that Jesus knew everything that was going to happen, so he was unaffected by it. But that is not at all true. Jesus is still distressed by the fact that this guy who's been with him all this time is betraying him, even though he knew the whole time that it was going to happen. It doesn't mean that he's not moved by things that happen that are unfortunate. Extract that and look at our own lives as well. Just because he knows that we might still be sinning, he is still, even now, affected by our sinning. He wants us not to do that. And it is distressing to Jesus that we do, because he wants sometimes better for us than we want for ourselves. And he continues to want better for us even when we choose not that, even when he very much knows that that's going to happen. Pray this doesn't happen to us, but it certainly is. I worked at a substance abuse rehabilitation facility for a while. One of the things we saw is you can be a parent, you can know your child is enmeshed in this addiction. It can be very distressing to you. You can still continue to see this repeated pattern of very predictable behavior. You can know about it. It's still obviously very upsetting to you because you want better for your child. That's kind of what I think of now when I think of this. Jesus always wants better for us, even when he knows we're going to just keep doing these dumb things we're doing. He still wants better for us, and he is still hurt by what it is we're doing. Not because he's offended by us, but because he wants better things for us. So general reflection, Jesus is emotionally affected by what we're doing. Not because it's some great tragedy inflicted on him, but because he wants better for us than sometimes we want for ourselves. Second point, we introduce our third character here in terms of how people are reacting to Jesus. We've had Judas, who puts himself above Jesus. We've had Simon Peter, who puts himself below Jesus. And now we see reclining right next to Jesus, right on the level of Jesus is the one that Jesus loved. Unnamed, but it's John. We'll eventually find out the one who is the evangelist, John, the one writing. It's not accidental that he also refers to himself just as the one Jesus loved at this particular point. He's the one closest to Jesus in all of this. He's the one putting himself on the level of Jesus and not putting up barriers or distance. It's not because Jesus loves John more than he loves Peter. It's because John lets himself be loved by Jesus more than Peter does at this point. John has a better sense of who Jesus is and is much more willing to roll with the flow and trust Jesus to know what's going on. Which is really evidenced here. Jesus says, someone's going to betray me. Peter says, I need to know who it is. You know he's thinking, I'm going to get that guy, right? I'm going to make that not happen. John is much more chill about the whole thing and is just sitting back like, oh, well, okay, if that's what's going to happen, I guess that's what's going to happen. And what a different response to Jesus. Peter is still kind of, I know better. I think I know how things need to go, and I want to step in and intervene on your behalf, Jesus, because you clearly can't know what you're doing. That is the implication, by the way. When we think we know better than God, the implication is that God doesn't know what he's doing, which is, of course, ludicrous, but we all do it in subtle ways frequently. Well, I do it frequently. We all do it occasionally, at the least. John is very much not that. So John is right there on the level of Jesus, willing to let Jesus call the shots, and is content to just roll with the flow. Which is how we're supposed to be as well. John is the one in this version, in this current exchange, setting the example for how we're supposed to behave. We're supposed to just hang there with Jesus, let Jesus control how things are going, and stay as close to him as possible. And that's the example in this dinner of being a disciple the way Jesus wants. And that's why John is the one Jesus loves, is because he's the one who's letting Jesus love him the way Jesus is trying to. So now we're going to kind of tie a bow on that whole betrayal thread. John's gospel doesn't dwell on it over much, especially as we start talking about building the church and all of those expectations. We kind of clear out Judas the traitor here right away. Jesus gives him the morsel, he leaves. And for the rest of what's happening, Judas isn't here. And he's really not going to come back into play in this gospel to speak of. We know he's going off to betray Jesus. He'll show up when the soldiers come back to arrest Jesus, lest there be any mistake that he's leading that charge. But he has very, very little significance from now on. But what we do know is the sequence of events has been triggered, right? He's left to betray Jesus. That's going to trigger Jesus being captured and killed. Jesus knew that was going to happen. Jesus let him go. This is not an accident. Judas did not outsmart Jesus with his brilliant betrayal plan. Jesus made sure everyone, including Judas, knew that Jesus knew what Judas was going to do. In fact, at this point, Judas is the only one who's fully tracking that Jesus knows what's happening. Everyone else is, why did Judas just leave after Jesus said he was going to give him a morsel of bread, and then he was going to the betrayer, and then Judas took the bread, and then for some reason he must have gone to check the money box. It reads a little bit like that, but it's also not clear who heard what Jesus told John. Again, John for sure heard. It's entirely possible no one else heard Jesus' answer to the question, who's going to do this? And John didn't seem interested in stopping it. But the timing of, so one of you is going to betray me. Oh, Judas went to check on the money box. It's still awfully convenient, right? But most importantly, Judas gone. Judas knows that Jesus knows that he's going to betray him. He does it anyway. Jesus could have stopped him and doesn't, because things are happening the way Jesus wants them to. And those are the key takeaways here. Now is the Son of Man glorified. What now? The thing that's about to immediately happen is one of his closest followers is about to betray him. In other examples in history, that's usually not when people find glory. Similar sort of thing happened to Julius Caesar. He didn't think his great glory was when he was betrayed by his friend Brutus. In fact, that was like the opposite of that. By earthly standards, being betrayed by one of your closest followers is not where you're glorified. Being brutally tortured and killed is not where you're glorified, especially when it's meant to be shameful. Glory becomes a critically important theme in this next section of John's Gospel. So much so that this is sometimes called the Book of Glory. So what is glory? The word is related to how things seem or appear. The glorification of Jesus and of God really is that you see God in Jesus. The Son of Man being glorified is you can finally, through the passion, death, and resurrection, see clearly through the human veil of person to God who is in Jesus through what happens. That is the glory of God revealed, and this is not a thing that anyone else would do. It doesn't happen in a way it would happen to anyone else. No one else would choose this. If you start to understand what Jesus is doing, which is why he's making it so clear in advance, because without him helping you understand, you probably won't. But if you can see his intentionality and his choosing these things for the reasons he chooses them, then you can see this isn't a person doing this. You can see God through what Jesus is doing. He's glorified. And God is glorified as well, in that you can see something essential about the nature of God through what Jesus is doing that you wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. As long as God is just up in heaven, how can you see how much he loves you? This manifestation of God as Jesus, suffering and dying to allow you and me and these guys to not die. That's a thing that we had to see to understand. God couldn't show us that love without doing it, without making it incarnate, touchable. But somehow then in this form of a human being, we can see something about the divinity that we would not have otherwise been able to grasp. So in Christ, God the Father is glorified. And in this act of the Passion, Jesus Christ is also glorified. They're fully revealed or fully visible, seeable, understandable. Again, through faith primarily, which is why faith is the major theme through the first half of the gospel. We don't come here to the glory of God unless we come by way of faith. We won't be able to see God in this thing and recognize the glory of God without that faith. But if we've followed along with Jesus to now and we have faith, then we can begin through these next parts of what happens to also see the glory of God. We're laying the foundation for the church, and this is that foundation. In the Old Testament, we had a bunch of different rules or commandments. All of that is significant and important, and you should still follow the Ten Commandments. Not saying that any of that is annulled or no longer applicable. This is more like number 11 than a new number 1, but it also moves to the top of the list. So maybe more like number 0 now that I think about it. It is, when people talk about the Old Covenant, it's very clear there are these 10 governing rules. Now we're going to have a new covenant with that. What is that new covenant? Is a question that I like asking people when they talk about a new covenant. Because a covenant isn't just like a thing where you get stuff, right? It's an agreement between two parties. It's a binding agreement between two parties. Both parties provide something in the agreement. If within the new covenant, the thing God is providing is eternal, unending life and happiness, awesome. What are we providing back? The old one had 10 rules. You would think for what we're getting back, it would be more like 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 new rules, right? Because it's so infinitely better, the new thing, than the old one. Shouldn't it require infinitely more from us? Short answer, yes, it does. But that infinitely greater requirement is also much simpler in stating, much harder in doing, much simpler in stating. All we have to do is what Jesus is about to do, right? He knows all of this is going to happen. He came down, God lowered himself and his status and served to the point of death the people that he loved. All we have to do to receive the gift that he has promised us through that is do the same thing. No problem. Easy. No. Simple, yes. Easy, not at all. So as we go through the Passion, John's Gospel, more than any of the others, makes it extraordinarily clear from the front end. This isn't just a thing that Jesus is doing. This is a model. This is the thing that the church does. And we know that these followers of Jesus got that eventually. They probably don't get it right now. But after he came back to life from the dead, and the Holy Spirit came to them and helped them figure out what was what, they understood that what Jesus did is what they were supposed to do. And nearly all of them were martyred as a result of that. They did likewise. They understood this to mean give of myself, even to the point of death, for these people who do not appreciate what I'm doing, because I'm not doing it for them. Right? This is fundamentally different from the golden rule. Treat others the way I want to be treated is about, if I do that, then people will give back to me as well. That golden rule is sometimes philosophically called the ethic of reciprocity. But it's about how do we maximize everyone's general best interest in life. If everybody does that, great, then we'll kind of get there. But it's fundamentally still a selfish principle. It's still about me, and it's based on me. Right? I would never treat anybody better than I would want to be treated. That's because, I want pretty good. But who would ever have the gall to ask what is given by Jesus? Or that price be paid? No sane person would ask that much of someone else. But Jesus does. But he has the right to because he did it first for us. And having done it for us, and with what he knows that it gives to us because he did it, he uniquely has the right to again ask it of us. And that's how this Christian love works. When we love other people, it's not about loving them. Although, yes, please do love them. But it's about, I love you whether you deserve it or not, because I love Jesus. The same way what Jesus did for us, he did because he loves the Father. Yeah, he loves you and me too. But he did it because of his love for the Father. And that doesn't make what he does for us less significant. So when I go and serve the needs of other people because I love Jesus, I'm still loving them, and that's great. But again, I'm mostly loving and serving Jesus, who earned it. So that it doesn't matter if that guy down the street earned it or not. or if my neighbor is being a jerk, but I'm still nice to him because of Jesus, it doesn't matter that they don't deserve it, because I'm primarily working to serve and to love Jesus, who asked me to do it, and first did it for me, who doesn't deserve it, because he loved his Father. And so he has set a model, an example, and he uniquely has the right now to ask and to require of me that I do for others what he did for me. But I'm doing it, although it benefits others, I'm doing it for him. And that is the heart of Christian love. And that is the thing that he had to do first for us to get. There's no asking that of people without modeling it first, right? There's no way anybody's going to buy into that. In the Old Testament, there are hints of this, right? There are passages that foreshadow it, and the prophets and a few people in the Maccabees are the best example of people starting to get it and moving in that direction. But it's a few people with a unique relationship with God held up as great examples, and it's not the common expectation, nor is it written into the law that everyone's expected to. Now we have a single Christian commandment in the Gospel according to John. Love one another as I have loved you. That is applicable to all Christians, and that is the commandment, the one commandment upon which the Church of Jesus Christ is built. And now again, to round this out, after that beautiful and inspiring new commandment, Peter is going to be Peter. And he's going to latch on to the part where Jesus said, I'm going away, and not the part where Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And I said, no, it doesn't matter where you're going, Jesus. I'm going to follow you wherever it is. Just even to the point of death. And now we see the secondary prediction. So we've had three people's reactions to Jesus that have been kind of framed how this whole supper exchange has gone. We've had Peter, Judas, and John. The two who don't get it, Jesus is going to tell what's going to happen as a direct result of their misunderstanding. They're going to veer away from the path they should be following through this passion. And Jesus tells both of them, here's how you're going to go astray. Judas, we know you're going to betray me. You might as well go do it now, because you don't get it anyway, and that's where that leads. Peter, where that leads is you're also going to veer off the course. And you think you're willing to die for me because you think this is a thing that it's not. And you're going to get close and try to do that, and you're going to miss the mark here at the end and end up denying me and not doing that as well, because you don't get it either. And that's okay. Again, this is the thing that Jesus loves about Peter, is he does this. Jesus is troubled, we hear, when he says that Judas is going to betray him. We don't see here Jesus was troubled, or even Jesus was exacerbated. Oh, Peter, here you go again. Jesus is being very patient, but he's also saying, this is where this is going to lead you, Peter. You're still not getting it. But there's a remedy for that. There's not a remedy for Judas' obstinate betrayal of Jesus. There's a remedy for Peter not understanding, but being very enthusiastic. Jesus will work with Peter where he can't work with Judas. And the third guy who stays with Jesus through this whole thing because he's just following the flow and letting Jesus take the lead, does very well. It comes down to, toward the end, there's a race to the end, right? It's symbolized, and there's like a foot race between between Peter and John right at the end. John gets right up to the threshold ahead and doesn't quite make it. And Peter gets across the finish line first because of this enthusiasm. It's what carries him. John is ahead right up until the end. And then Peter gets where John doesn't go because of this attitude. So this betrayal is not this denial is clearly not a thing that Peter is going to be happy that he did. We know that. And it's not a thing that Jesus surely loves that Peter is doing. But Jesus knows who Peter is, that this is happening, and it's not a thing to be really down on Peter about. Just like when we make mistakes, right? We don't follow Jesus perfectly. And again, the important thing is that enthusiasm. Am I going to say, oh, I made a mistake now. Now that I see it's a mistake, I'm going to do something else. And I'm not going to let it damp my enthusiasm. I'm going to do the something else just as enthusiastically as I did the other thing I did. And I'm going to just keep going and keep... Peter is still running to the tomb. As soon as he hears that the body's not there, he's not saying, I betrayed him, I'm going to just sit here and wallow. Or I denied him, sorry. And so I'm just going to sit here, feel sorry for myself, and wallow. I'm going to sprint to where he was, to that tomb, and figure out what's going on. He doesn't let it get him down. And we have to do the same thing. We have to continue to be enthusiastic in our pursuit. Also, Jesus is going somewhere they can't follow. Where is that? Because everybody can die, right? And Peter kind of thinks that that's death. Well, and volunteers to do that, but that's not what it is. Because again, everyone can die. Not everyone can not die. Only Jesus can do that. So Peter could die, but it wouldn't serve any purpose because he'd be dead. As opposed to Jesus, who not dies, who experiences death but doesn't die, and ascends as a result of that bodily into heaven. A thing that we've seen Lazarus raised from the dead on earth. Great. That's not an unprecedented thing for someone to resurrect from the dead. What has never in the history of time happened up until this moment with Jesus, and has only up till present happened one other time after that, is a person ascends bodily into heaven, or goes up bodily into heaven. The other one is assumed and not ascends. The difference in language being Jesus knows the way and walks up there himself. Jesus' mother is picked up and taken there. She probably didn't know the way any better than you or I would, but her son gets her there. Because again, her body, like his, is incorrupt because it has not experienced sin. And so it can go bodily into heaven. At the end, all of us will have glorified bodies able to ascend into heaven. That's at the end of time. We're not there yet. So Jesus, uniquely at this point, is able to ascend into heaven. Peter, for all of his enthusiasm, is not able to follow, even if he were to die. So what we will see is what Jesus is doing is making it possible for Peter to be with him, possible for all of these things to come about. He's building a new thing that, yes, people can't understand yet, but he's working diligently to help everyone understand what he's doing and to bring them with him. The ascension of Jesus, and we'll unpack it a great deal more as we move through these next few chapters, is not just about Jesus. It's about allowing all of us eventually to follow. But first, Jesus has to go. This has been an overview of Lesson 16 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, The Gospel According to John, an Encounter with Grace and Truth. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.